Well, my name is Josh Blank, and I'm the research director of the Texas Politics Project at UT Austin. I graduated with a master's and a PhD in political science or government from the University of Texas in 2015. That's a tough question, and I think maybe it's tough for me to answer partially because I've gotten to work on a lot of research projects just over my years here, and I love doing research. And I think part of what makes me a good researcher is actually that I'm relatively detached. It doesn't take a lot for me to get interested in a project for a certain amount of time. It's probably why I'm not an academic, because there's a clear end date for me on my interest in any project. So, I think for me, it's actually more of a meta thing, which is that, we have now at the Texas Politics Project, I think over 45 we make all this data publicly available surveys that anyone can use for any purpose. And a lot of, what I think is the most interesting is the ongoing work of making it easier both for myself, but also for others to extract insights from this extensive polling archive. And it's not so obvious, the best way to go about doing that. If you think about the way that academics do something, which is where I came from, if you're going to work on survey work, you're going to do a survey. In fact, you might not even write a whole survey. You might write 5 questions for a survey. Well, you go from that to say like, okay, well, we need to know how to write surveys, and that's something that I do a lot of. Actually collect the data, it's a whole other piece of it. But then what do you do when you've got let's say 20 surveys over the last 5 years, and you've asked about public education, let's say 12 different ways, and they're spread across all these surveys? How do you collect all that information together? And that's actually a very programmatic process. So one of the things I actually like the most is almost completely different, which is I really like, and I find the most interesting is building tools with like R or Python or some kind of scripting language to actually generate insights for myself more quickly when I want to be able to understand, let's say, trends and attitudes towards marijuana decriminalization over the last 10 years in Texas. And I actually in some ways building the tool that allows me to write a couple lines of code and have a table that spits out where Republicans and Democrats on this have been on every single measure. That's what really kind of gets me excited. But that's sort of a personal, and I find that the most interesting. There's a lot of aspects that go into it, but that's actually the thing I think is an ongoing piece that is really has been the most interesting, and I'm still super interested in continuing to work on. I think the main, thing, there's a couple things that you learn in grad school that are helpful. I think one of the main sort of skills that carries forward is just, being able to look at a large project and break it down into its constituent pieces. And even if you don't know exactly what those constituent pieces are or what they contain. That's the thing. Sometimes, you start a project and you say, okay, step 1, research, and it's like, okay, what does that mean? Right. And, you can sort of, well, you kind of know what that means. You start to break it out. But, if you're going to go from graduate school, if someone is going to go from graduate school to a non-academic position, I think most of the people that I know in this space, they're not going somewhere to lay bricks. Some people might, but most people want to go somewhere and use their mind and be challenged and have complex things to work on. And so, it's unlikely that you're going to go get your PhD in whatever and then go somewhere and say, okay, it's time to fill in the spreadsheet from 9 to 11, have lunch, come back at 12, and then finish out the day. It doesn't, it just doesn't really work that way. And I don't think that's what most people are looking for, again, in the position, again, graduate students find themselves in. And so, the idea is you want to go somewhere and you want someone to ask you to do hard stuff. And so I think that's one of the things that comes out of graduate school is that, you should be at least less scared than the average person in taking on a big project and knowing how to take on a big project and really, break it down. And part of it is breaking it down, thinking about the manageable pieces, but also, slowing down and thinking about the pieces themselves and the overall process in a way that I think, a lot of people just, don't have practice at doing or can't do. And this is where I think there's a competitive advantage for people, with a PhD who've gone through this process relative to, let's say someone who, a company or an institution or whatever is going to train on the job. Yeah, I mean, I think in graduate school, it's important to take on projects. I mean, what you mentioned, I think that's how I started in this role really is I was a research assistant. I mean, I originally this was a 10-hour a week position, and it just grew and grew and grew to the point now where, I'm probably, I probably do the most publicly available, the most public opinion polling in the state, over the last 10 years. But it just started as an RA position. And I always kind of took that approach to graduate school. I thought, I think especially when you're not exactly sure what your next step is, I always thought it's a good idea to have more irons in the fire than less, because you can't control that. And what I mean is that, you're working on a couple projects with different faculty members. You're taking that RA position. Some people worry about overextending themselves, but honestly, in my experience, if you're working with 5 faculty members on 5 different projects, really only one of them or 2 of them are actually going to be pushing that project ahead at any sort of fast pace. So, you may as well go for it. And then, you can always say, hey, look, this isn't fitting my schedule anymore and leave. But I think it provides you with a really good, broader exposure to, different people's approaches to what you're doing. So I think it depends on where you are in the process. So first and foremost, what I think is really helpful is, regardless of what you think you're going to do, whether you think you're definitely going to be an academic, whether you think you're just coming in to get a master's and get out, or you're going to get this PhD, but then you're going to jump ship or whatever, I think you got to approach your work in graduate school as if you're trying to get the best academic job you can get. I think anything else about thinking about, what the next step is, or maybe I should do this project in such a way so that I develop this certain set of skills that'll be really valuable. It's like, in my experience, and I've been around the university now, for over 10 years, it just doesn't really work out. But what does work out is just trying to do the best you can at the thing that you've been tasked with doing, because that's always going to help you. So, and I think ultimately, even if you don't end up going down an academic track, one, the faculty members who you've been working with are going to, they're going to say, okay, well, this is a good student, they've done good work. Usually I think they're going to be more amenable to helping you make that transition. And also, to the extent that there's any sort of transition or there's any sort of, let's say, overlap between the skills you're developing in graduate school and the skills you plan on using, you should really try hard to develop those skills. It's useful. As I said, these things that we talk about, being able to break down big projects, being able to write a lot, being able to talk about complicated things, these are all very helpful skills, and you develop them by doing the work in graduate school like you're trying to get that, that tenure track job at Harvard. Just do it. It's a good approach. So that's one, just do the work like, you're looking for the best academic job you can get. The other one, this is the one I tell people all the time, is, I think in graduate school, it's really easy to get locked up and sort of into a state of immobility because there's so much to do or you're not sure. And I'm going to tell you, the answer is always the same. Just start doing the work. The answer is always that. There's nothing else. There's nothing else you're going to discover or find out or or learn from someone that's going to lead to something that is not to just get the work done and just start putting your head down and putting in the time. And that's really it. And I think we all get kind of immobilized from time to time. But in graduate school, it can be really, really overwhelming. And then the last thing, this was given to me, this is sort of on the other side, so the first one was like, do your work like you're trying to get into Harvard. The last, you're trying to get a tenure track job at Harvard. The last piece of advice that someone gave me, which is true, which is the best dissertation is done. So once you've made that decision and you are at the point where you said, maybe I'm not looking for a tenure track position at Harvard. First of all, your dissertation is going to be a lot better than it would have been at that point and a lot closer to done if that's what you decided. And then when you decide, well, do I want to do academia or not, you have options. But when you get to that point where you've made that choice, figure out how to get it done as quickly as possible so that your faculty members will accept it. So best dissertation is complete.